Human relationship is a problem. One day Peter felt very magnanimous. He felt very, very generous. He said, Lord, shall we forgive somebody 7 times a day? The Lord said, no. 70 times 7 times a day. Peter said, God, increase my faith. The problem is our relationship. Jesus said, this commandment I leave you, that you love one another. And if you love me, you will keep my commandment. And it's hard to love us because we're still in the flesh. We do things that hurt people. Or on purpose because we're just feeling nasty that day. Or accidentally. But we still do. So you raised your hands a few moments ago. We have been hurt and we've hurt others. You know, that's just the way we are. And so we've got to come to realizing I can't afford not to love. I can't afford not to love. It's too expensive. It costs too much. It costs the anointing. It costs relationship. It costs the joy. It costs the ministry. It costs everything. Just stop loving. You don't have to go any further than that. A story I've told several times. It's an extraordinary story. The story of a couple that came to us on the mission field. They were married. They had a couple children, about 6 and 8, or 5 and 7, something like that. But they had a very severe marriage problem. They would fight terribly. But he had a good anointing, wonderful anointing, and she did too. They went to marriage counselors. They went to pastors. They were prayed for and tried to get deliverance. But it just got worse. It got so bad, she would go into rages. It was just uncontrolled rages. It got so bad that the children came to their father and said, Daddy, Mommy's going crazy. And he was seriously considering putting her into an institution if she'd get uncontrollable. One morning we were in worship service. She was not there. He was there. We were singing that song, not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. And the anointing was in it. We were singing it for a while. And as we were singing it, I saw this great, tall, wide mountain. And a path that led right up to it and stopped. And it was real steep. And the word of the Lord came to me and said, see that mountain? It is too high to go over. And it's too wide to go around. But speak to that mountain. Tell it to be plucked up by its roots and thrown into the sea. And when he said that, I knew it was that problem of that woman. And when he said by its roots, I knew it went way back in her life. Been way back there. And I knew that if I prophesied that, if I spoke like he told me to, that her husband would hear me and he would know what it was. Well, I didn't want to say anything because she'd been prayed for and gone to counselors, everybody in the world tried to help her, and I wasn't going to stick my little foot in. I said, Lord, that's not for me. But he spoke again. He said, that mountain is too high to go over. And it's too wide to go around. Speak to it. And so rather than disobey it, I spoke to it. After service, her husband came to me and said, I heard you prophesy about a mountain. I said, yes. He said, I know what that mountain is. That's my wife. I said, well, let's see what happens. The next day, she was walking down the street in the city of Mar del Plata in Argentina. She said, suddenly, like a great black cloud rolled off, and the sun was shining and bright. She was so happy. She was so relieved that she went down the street singing and dancing and praising God right in the middle of the street. And she was free. 4 months went by, and then it came back. One night, about 2 o'clock in the morning, her husband woke up with a panic. He said, I've never felt a panic like that in my whole life. It was just some terrible, terrible panic. Something terrible was happening. And he looked over at his wife, and she wasn't in bed. And he didn't know what else to do, so he just cried out, Jesus, help! And when he did that, his wife came running into the room, crying. She had been down to the kitchen. She had picked up a big butcher knife. And when he cried out, she was standing over the beds of her children, ready to slay them. They were scared. I said, all right, we'll pray for them. But I said, I want to tell you something. We're going to ask some questions. And I told him the question. I said, we're going to have these answers. And I told him the answers. And I said, look, I want a witness. So we took another missionary with us. We went to see her. And I said, Ruth, do you know what your problem is? She said, yes. I said, who told you? Nobody. I know. I said, how long have you had it? She said, since I was 9 years of age. I said, then it's not a marriage problem, is it? She said, no. And I always knew it wasn't. I said, do you know the name of your problem? She said, yes. I said, who told you its name? She said, nobody. I said, then tell me its name. He said, self-pity. I said, how did it begin? He said, when I was 9 years of age, my father forbid me to go and accept an invitation that was given me by a couple of little children. They wanted me to come and stay all night with them. They were friends. My father said no. And I was so angry, I went to my room and I just sulked. I just gave in to that anger. Resentment stayed there, full of self-pity. He said, ever after that, whenever I was frustrated and I couldn't do what I wanted to do, I give over to that and just grew bigger and bigger and bigger till I couldn't get away from it. He said I'd fight against it, but I couldn't do it. Because I'd known it, and I've known it all the while. So we prayed again. Cast that thing out. She was free for another 4 months. And then one night she woke her husband and said, wake up, pray for me. It's coming back. He said, I'm not going to pray for you. What do I do? He said, pray for yourself. Well, how? He said, name it and tell it to get out. And she did, and it did, and that was the end of it. As soon as she could recognize it herself, no, you're not coming in here. Get out.